It was one of those nights that felt easy, you know? Soft music playing in the background, the kind of lighting that made everyone's skin glow, a little warmer, laughter spilling across the room like something vintage and golden. I remember feeling good, not in a loud, all eyes on me way, but in the way where you're just comfortable in your own skin. That doesn't happen often, so when it does, you notice there was this guy. Not the kind of guy that enters the room and demands attention, but the kind that lingers in conversation just a little longer, who actually listens not just to respond, but to understand. We had been talking on and off for a couple of weeks, not serious, not labeled, just feeling things out, no pressure, no plans. I liked that. I liked him. That night, we ended up sitting outside by the pool after everyone else had gone in. He was wearing this old sweatshirt with the sleeves pushed up, and I swear he had this calm energy that made everything around feel less heavy. We talked about music, about weird childhood memories, about what keeps us up at night when we're alone. The vibe wasn't forced. It was just good. So when I leaned in closer and the space between us kind of dissolved, I didn't really think much of it. It felt like a natural moment, something sweet and silent. But right before anything could happen, he said it clear and soft. I don't think I'm ready for this. I paused. Not because I was upset, but because it caught me off guard. You know, we don't talk enough about when guys say no. We always prepare ourselves for rejection as women like it's some rite of passage, but no one really tells you what to do when the tables turn and suddenly someone is telling you no. There's a part of your ego that feels it, sure, but then there's this other part, the more mature part, that just respects it instantly. And that's what happened. I didn't ask why. I didn't push. I just leaned back, looked at him, and said, "That's okay." And I meant it. Later when I got home, I thought about how powerful that moment was. Not because something physical didn't happen, but because something emotional did. Asterisk. He trusted me enough to be honest, to draw a boundary. And I didn't make it about me. I didn't take his no as rejection. I took it as respect for himself. And for me too. Boundaries are so underrated. We talk about self-love and empowerment, but it all starts with knowing when to say no and honoring when someone else does. His no wasn't a wall, it was a window. It gave me a glimpse into who he was. A man who could speak for himself without guilt. A man who had nothing to prove. I think that's rare and incredibly beautiful. Looking back, I'm proud of myself too. For not turning the moment into a bruise. For not needing a reason, for just letting it be what it was, a moment of mutual respect. That night didn't end in fireworks or romance, but it did end in peace, and honestly, that was enough. Because here's the thing, we always want our yes to be heard, but we forget that listening to a no is just as important. It's not about rejection, it's about recognition. When someone says no, they're letting you see their truth, and you get to decide whether you'll meet it with pressure or with presence. So yeah, that night taught me a lot about him, but also about me, about how strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the quiet way we accept boundaries with grace. And how love, or the beginning of it, doesn't always come from crossing lines. Sometimes it's born in how we respect the ones that are drawn. And that's a different kind of intimacy. One that lasts, one that builds trust before anything else. That's what I felt that night. That's what stayed with me. There's this thing about boundaries that people often misunderstand. Like when you say, "I need space," or "I don't want to go there," they think you're closing off, that you're building walls to keep others out. But that's not what boundaries are. At least not the kind that come from love. Real boundaries, healthy ones, they're not barriers, they're bridges. They help people understand how to truly connect with you, how to meet you where you are, and most importantly, how to do it with care. I remember being in a relationship that looked perfect on the outside. You know, the kind, cute pictures, inside jokes, constant texting, good chemistry. But underneath, it was like I was always tiptoeing. Every time I tried to express what I needed or how I felt, it felt like I was being difficult, like I was being too much. And I think, at the time, I didn't realize that I had stopped drawing lines not because I didn't need them, but because I was afraid they'd make him walk away. That's the hardest part, right? When you care about someone so much, you think letting your guard down means letting all your boundaries go too, but it doesn't. In fact, real love, deep, grounded love, doesn't just respect your boundaries. It honors them. It doesn't see them as rejection. It sees them as guidance, like a map to who you really are and how to love you well. Eventually, that relationship ended. Not in some huge blow-up, but in a slow, quiet unraveling. I think we both knew we weren't truly connecting anymore, not in a real way. And after it was over, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I sat with myself, no distractions, no background noise, just me and my thoughts. And I started asking myself questions I had avoided. What do I actually need from someone? Where do I draw the line between compromise and self-sacrifice? When do I feel most safe, most seen, most loved? The answers didn't come all at once. They came in layers, like peeling something fragile and familiar. And what I realized was this: I had to start viewing boundaries not as things that push people away, but as tools that let the right people come closer in the right way. Think about it like this: when you invite someone into your home, you don't just hand them the keys and disappear. You show them around. You say, "This is where I keep my favorite books," or "Please take your shoes off at the door." It's not because you're being cold. It's because you care about your space and you want them to treat it with respect. That's what emotional boundaries are like. They tell people, here's how to love me without breaking me. And when someone listens to that, when they actually lean in and hear you, something shifts. The connection deepens. There's trust, because you know you don't have to hide. There's comfort, because you don't feel like you're constantly giving yourself away. It's not about controlling the other person. It's about creating a space where both of you can exist fully, without fear. Since then, I've learned to speak up more, to say, I'm not okay with that, or I need time without apologizing for it. And yeah, not everyone gets it. Some people walk away, but the ones who stay, they're the ones who matter. They're the ones who don't see your boundaries as limitations, but as an invitation to love you deeper, more intentionally, more genuinely. So no, boundaries aren't about shutting people out. They're about letting the right people in the people who don't need you to shrink or bend or lose yourself just to feel loved. They're the people who see your lines. And instead of crossing them, they pause and ask, can I meet you there? That kind of love. It doesn't burn out fast. It doesn't leave you wondering. It builds slowly, honestly, like a bridge between two people who know exactly where they stand and are proud of it. There's a moment in everyone's life when they feel the sting of silence after speaking their truth. You say what you feel, what you want, what you need, and then comes the pause, the tension. The space where someone else has to decide whether they'll meet you with understanding or resistance. And in that silence, it's easy to doubt yourself. Easy to ask, did I go too far? Or should I have kept that to myself? But here's the truth, I had to learn the hard way. Your truth will never scare off the right person. I was always the one who tried to make things easier for everyone else. I would soften my tone, dim my light, even downplay how I felt just to avoid conflict. I thought that being low maintenance meant being lovable. Easy to ask, did I go too far? Or should I have kept that to myself? But here's the truth, I had to learn the hard way. Your truth will never scare off the right person. I was always the one who tried to make things easier for everyone else. I would soften my tone, dim my light, even downplay how I felt just to avoid conflict. I thought that being low maintenance meant being lovable, that if I didn't ask for too much, I would be easier to keep. But in doing that, I kept losing pieces of myself quietly, slowly, until one day, I didn't recognize the girl in the mirror. She looked tired, not just physically, but emotionally. Worn from being too agreeable. Then came a relationship that felt different at first, thoughtful, present, kind. I remember thinking, maybe this is what it's supposed to be like. But even then, I hesitated when it came to setting real emotional boundaries. I was afraid that if I said no or expressed discomfort, I'd ruin the peace. And one night, when he crossed a line knot in a dramatic way, but in a subtle, dismissive way, I found myself frozen. I didn't want to seem difficult, so I said nothing. But that night stayed with me, not because of what happened, but because of how I betrayed myself by staying silent. That silence echoed for weeks. It crept into my sleep, into my thoughts, into every conversation that followed, until I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told him. I explained, calmly but honestly, how I felt, why it crossed a line, and what I needed going forward. And in that moment, I braced for disappointment, for rejection, for him to roll his eyes or laugh it off. Instead, he paused, he listened, and then he said, "Thank you for telling me." That's it. Not defensive, not angry, just acknowledgement. It was the first time I realized that boundaries don't have to be loud or harsh. They don't have to come with ultimatums or drama. Sometimes they're just quiet truths, spoken with clarity. And the right person won't shrink away from them. They'll step closer because they know that understanding you means respecting your space. That experience changed how I carry myself now. I no longer see boundaries as something I owe others an explanation for. They're a form of self-love, not self-protection. They're how I stay honest, how I stay whole. And the more I honor them, the more I attract people who value depth over convenience. People who aren't just looking to be close to me, but to truly understand me. It also made me realize that mutual respect is non-negotiable, that being heard is just as important as being loved, and that love without respect isn't really love at all, it's control, dressed in affection. The right person doesn't just accept your boundaries, they admire your courage for setting them. So now, when I feel something isn't right, I speak, even if my voice shakes, even if it's uncomfortable, because what's more uncomfortable is betraying yourself for the sake of someone else's comfort. That never ends well. That always leaves scars. We live in a world where silence is often rewarded with short-term peace, but your truth is worth the risk of discomfort. Your truth is your compass. And when you speak it clearly and calmly, you don't push people away. You create the opportunity for real connection, for real safety, for love that is not just passionate, but patient. Not just exciting, but enduring. So if you're in that place, afraid to speak, afraid to lose someone by setting a boundary, remember this: the people who are meant for you won't leave when you show up as your full self. They'll lean in. They'll listen. They'll grow with you. Because in the end, honoring your truth is the most powerful invitation you can give someone. It says, "This is who I am. Will you meet me here?" And when the answer is yes, that's when something beautiful begins. There was a time I thought boundaries were walls. Like, if I said no or if I pushed back even a little, I'd be closing people out, making myself hard to love. But the truth? Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. They tell people how to enter your life, how to stay, and how to treat you when they're there. This lesson hit me during a chapter of my life where I was constantly giving my time, my energy, my emotions. I thought being available all the time made me kind. I confused being open with being boundaryless. And for a while it felt good. It felt like I was being the bigger person, being strong, being chill, until it didn't anymore. I started feeling drained. Conversations that used to make me feel seen started making me feel invisible. I'd leave hangouts feeling more alone than when I showed up. I'd answer texts. I didn't want to say yes when everything in me was screaming no, and compromise just to keep the peace. And slowly, without realizing it, I began disappearing from my own life. That's the thing about not having boundaries at first. It looks like love. It looks like loyalty. But it slowly turns into self-abandonment. The turning point came when someone I deeply cared about crossed a line that I never thought I'd have to explain. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just felt numb. And in that numbness, a voice inside me whispered something I'd been ignoring for too long. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to protect your peace. You're allowed to say no. That voice was soft, but it was persistent. And it gave me the courage to start doing something radical, setting boundaries. At first, it was terrifying. Saying, "I'm not available right now," felt like a betrayal. Asking for space felt like I was being selfish. But the more I practiced, the more I realized it was the opposite. Boundaries weren't about pushing people away, they were about inviting the right people in. The ones who could respect where I ended and where they began. Felt like a betrayal. Asking for space felt like I was being selfish. But the more I practiced, the more I realized it was the opposite. Boundaries weren't about pushing people away, they were about inviting the right people in. The ones who could respect where I ended and where they began. What surprised me the most was how people responded. Some, disappeared. They got frustrated, said I was changing, called me difficult, but others, people who truly cared, leaned in. They listened. They said, "Thank you for being honest." And slowly, I started attracting more of those people, the kind who value honesty over comfort, who love you not just for what you give, but for who you are. One thing I've learned is that boundaries aren't about making people behave a certain way. They're about deciding what behavior you will and won't allow into your life. They're not threats. They're not punishment. They're clarity, and clarity is kind. I used to think love meant saying yes to everything. Now I know real love includes no. Real love respects limits. Real love doesn't make you choose between being loved and being whole. Now, my boundaries look like this. I don't explain myself endlessly. I don't justify my feelings. I don't stay in places that drain me. I don't shrink so others can feel comfortable. I don't chase people to prove my worth. And because of that, I've created room for relationships that are real, where I can show up messy, vulnerable, and honest, where I can say, "I need space," and be met with understanding, where I can disagree without fear, where love doesn't demand I lose myself to keep it. You don't have to be everything for everyone to be worthy of love. You don't have to overextend yourself to earn a place in someone's life. You don't need to bleed emotionally to prove your heart is pure. You just need to be real, to be present, to be honest, and to believe that the right people, the ones who truly see you, will honor your boundaries, not because you force them to, but because they want to. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you're hard to love. It means you love yourself enough to invite only what nurtures you. It means you're done negotiating your worth. It means you're choosing peace over pleasing, alignment over approval, and most of all, it means you're finally choosing you. Because you deserve to feel safe in your own skin, in your own heart, in your own story. Healing isn't linear. It's not like you wake up one day, set a few boundaries, stand up for yourself once, and suddenly everything clicks into place. It's more like this quiet, slow unfolding, a decision you have to make every day to keep choosing yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, even when the world around you tells you that you're too much or not enough. And honestly, that's where I found the deepest power in the quiet decisions, not the loud declarations. There's a moment after every tough boundary is set where it feels like the ground shakes a little beneath your feet. Because you've changed the rules of a relationship, or you've spoken your truth, or you've said no when you used to say yes. And the world doesn't always celebrate that. Some people pull away. Some question your change. Some make you doubt yourself. But there's also this other thing that starts to grow, a kind of inner peace, like your soul recognizes that you're finally honoring it, and it breathes a little easier. For me, the true transformation began when I started asking myself, what do I need right now? And then actually listening. Maybe it was rest, maybe space. Maybe to not pick up that call or reply to that text. Maybe to spend time alone without feeling guilty. It wasn't about isolating. It was about finally respecting my own emotional signals, the ones I used to silence just to keep the peace around me. And with that respect came clarity. I started to see patterns. I saw how I had trained people to expect constant access to me, how I'd put their comfort above my peace, how I thought being agreeable made me lovable. But love that requires you to disappear is not love. It's control wearing a pretty disguise. When I started showing up with my truth, even when it was messy or complicated, the world responded differently. Some people exited and they're leaving hurt, but it was also honest. It revealed what was real and what was built on performance, and what stayed. That became my safe space. Relationships that didn't flinch at honesty, people who didn't need me to be perfect, just present. That was everything. One of the hardest parts was unlearning the idea that being emotionally available means being endlessly accommodating. There's a difference between connection and self-sacrifice. I had to teach myself that being soft doesn't mean being silent, that you can be gentle and still have boundaries. You can be kind and still walk away from disrespect. You can love someone and still say, "This isn't healthy for me." I used to think strength was about endurance, how much I could carry, how much I could tolerate. Now I know real strength is about alignment. It's about knowing what hurts and not pretending it doesn't. It's about trusting your instincts, even when they lead you away from what looks good on the outside. It's about being so rooted in your worth that you no longer entertain situations that require you to question it. There's beauty in boundaries, yes, but there's also beauty in the self-trust that comes from honoring them. The kind of quiet, powerful beauty that says, I know who I am now. I don't need to be everything to everyone. I just need to be true to myself. And no, it's not always glamorous. There are lonely nights, tears you cry alone, memories you revisit and release. There's grief and growth, the letting go of who you used to be to become who you're meant to be. But each time you honor your voice, it gets louder. Each time you stand firm, your roots grow deeper. Each time you choose peace over pleasing, you step into your power. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't always get applause. But it shows up in how you carry yourself, in the glow of your quiet confidence, in the way you say no without guilt, in the way you no longer chase what's not for you, and in how deeply, unapologetically you now choose yourself. That's not just healing, that's freedom. Looking back on everything, the confusion, the pressure, the vulnerability, the realization, and the healing, I've come to understand that setting boundaries isn't about creating distance. It's about choosing connection that's real, not forced. Love isn't meant to hurt or confuse. It's meant to hold space for who we really are, flaws and all. And lust? It may burn hot, but it fades fast when it lacks depth. I've lived the discomfort of saying no, and the silence that followed. I've felt the ache of walking away from something that once felt safe but was actually limiting. And I've stood in front of a mirror asking myself if being true to me was enough, and now I know it always is. Because your worth isn't determined by how much you bend, how much you give, or how quiet you stay. It's defined by how fully you show up for yourself. Every story I've shared wasn't just mine, it's all of ours. We've all said yes when we meant no. We've all chased something that wasn't right just to feel something. But we also all have the power to change that, to pause, to reflect, to decide that from now on we lead with honesty, respect, and self-love. So if you're standing at that same edge between silence and truth, between fear and freedom, let this be your permission. Say the thing, set the line, walk away if you need to. You're not too much. You're not wrong, you're just finally choosing you. And that is the most beautiful beginning of all.